This episode is brought to you by Starry. When you drink Starry Lemon Lime Soda, every sip is a win. Perfect for game time or anytime. It's a crisp, refreshing lemon lime soda that's caffeine-free and bursting with flavor that makes you go, ah. Starry hits different. Find it in stores or online today.
This is it, Jennifer. Your big break in TV. Fuck the prime time, bitch.
Hello and welcome to Unequal Sequel. My name is Dave and I'm one of the two hosts of this tormented podcast.
And I'm Rich, and I'm the other host of this tormented podcast. Think of me as Ian Malcolm to Dave's Alan Grant. He's obsessed with dinosaurs, and I always dress in leather.
The premise of Unequal Sequel is very simple. We ask our guests and their best ever sequel, their worst ever sequel, and finally their dream sequel.
And of course, we'll often drift off and talk about life in general, sometimes other movies, who knows? Just rambly chats.
And sometimes we do drop some big fat spoilers by accident. This is by accident. So if we mention a film that you haven't seen and you don't want it ruined, then go off, Those stairs need hoovering, and the stairs need a lot of attention when it comes to hoovering. So do that and then come back, because on today's episode we are joined by Mike Muncer.
Mike is the host and creator of the Evolution of Horror podcasts, one of the absolute best movie podcasts out there. Make sure you give that a listen.
Yeah, we were very excited to sit down with Mike and chat all things sequels with him.
These are Mike Muncer's Unequal Sequels. Enjoy!
Can you remember the first sequel you got excited about?
Oh, the first sequel I got excited about. Yeah, actually, I probably can, and this might link to one of my picks later, actually.
Lovely.
But one of the earliest cinema experiences and best experiences I ever had when I would have been about 6 years old was seeing Jurassic Park in 1993. I was born in 87, so it's really one of my earliest ever cinema experiences and quite a formative film for me. Like, it's still one of my all-time favourite films. And it absolutely terrified me. Obviously, I was 6 years old and you're watching these children get, attacked in a car by this T-Rex. But I loved it. And I remember being very aware and very, very excited for The Lost World, which came out, 4 years later, something like that. Demanding that my parents take me opening weekend. So that was I think the first kind of real sort of sequel frenzy that I was in at that age.
And what was your first response to that movie, The Lost World? Was it excitement after you saw it, or was it disappointment?
It was disappointment. It was disappointment. I remember even as
He's a
probably
9-year-old.
would have been a 9-year-old then, thinking, oh my God, this is not as good as the original. No, yeah, I remember that very clearly. It had its moments, The Lost World, and actually sort of as I've gotten older, I've sort of come to appreciate parts of it more, but it's still, not great compared to the original, is it? Yeah. So it was definitely it was my first experience of sequel excitement, but also sequel disappointment. Maybe
that wasn't the film that made you realise films could be bad, was it?
No, I don't think so. I think I must have seen worse stuff by that point, I reckon. But when was the Godzilla, Matthew Broderick Godzilla?
98.
I remember seeing. Oh, so that was after, because I remember thinking that was dreadful at the cinema as a child as well, actually. Batman and Robin, maybe. Yeah. Those were kind of some of my early kind of formative cinema memories around that kind of 97, 98 period of seeing some pretty stupid sequels as well.
I think The Lost World is one of those sequels where it's not great when you first see it, and then when you watch what comes after it, it suddenly feels better.
Exactly, which I'm sure we'll get into in a bit.
Yeah. So you were 9 when you saw Lost World. Was that where your mum and dad take you to that one as well? Or
It was. Yeah, I went with my parents, and it was a packed cinema because obviously Jurassic Park was the biggest film of all time, and The Lost World was like the biggest sequel of all time, and I remember it being packed with kids and teenagers and parents and adults, and it was a really fun kind of buzz in that cinema. So despite the quality of the film kind of maybe not being as great as people hoped, it was still an amazing experience. I remember seeing that film.
which bits did you like back then? Was it the Raptors? Or
in the Lost World specifically, what did I love? I loved the raptors killing people in the sort of cornfield where they're sort of disappearing, and there's that whole set piece where the sort of trailer, the truck, is hanging over a cliff, and Julianne Moore is balanced on a pane of glass that is cracking. There are these amazing, Spielberg is actually, I think, underrated as a sort of horror movie director. He's so thought of now as this big family blockbuster sentimental guy, I think. And when you look at how well he directs horror in stuff like Jaws and the Jurassic Park movies, even War of the Worlds, which I think is underrated.
Yeah.
I think he's phenomenally good at sustained tension, jump scares, violence, and there's the odd set piece in The Lost World, which is as good as anything in the first film, I think, but it's kind of wrapped up in a lot of other quite stupid stuff. That whole storyline with the little girl, Jeff Goldblum's daughter, who gets kicked out of the gymnastics team, but then saves everyone using her power of gymnastics to beat back the velociraptors and stuff. Like, there's a lot of, and then everything in that final act with the T-Rex on the loose in San Diego or wherever it is.
Yeah.
It's all a bit ridiculous and annoying, I think, that stuff. So it's a sort of mixed bag.
that bit kind of feels like another film. Now
It
you
does.
watch it. Because it kind of ends on the island. You think, oh, people have died, people have made it off, heroes, and then they're like, oh, you go to stand up, and you're like, oh no, there's another 45 minutes of weirdness going on.
It's very weird. It's like another little movie tacked on the end, and not a very good one as well. It feels a bit strange and disjointed in that way, but it does have some spectacular moments for sure.
Pete Puffaway just disappears. He's like, I've caught my Rex. That's it now.
Exactly. And then another sequel that probably around that time I discovered on video, which was a much, much better sequel experience, and I'm sure people must have talked about this with you guys a lot, was Back to the Future 2. I was obsessed with the Back to the Future trilogy as well. I was born a little bit after they came out in cinemas, obviously, so I was watching them on VHS. And particularly Back to the Future 2 as a kid was my personal favourite of the three. I think as I've become an adult, I've kind of realised how brilliant and, unbeatable that first one is, really. But there's something about the second one that I thought was just the coolest, cleverest film I had ever seen when I was a kid, and I just watched it on repeat. It's unbelievable.
Was it the hoverboards?
Oh, it was the hoverboards. It was the weird dystopian section in the middle. And then I really loved him returning to the first film in the final act, it was just, it just blew my mind, that film. It kind of made me realise how, what you could do with cinema and what you could do with sequels too. This idea of kind of going back and affecting the events of the first film via the second film and everything was just such a cool idea.
What are your thirds and the third Back to the Future, now we're here?
I like it. It's, overall, I would say it's one of my favourite movie trilogies of all time. I love all of them to a point. I think the third one is my least favourite, and that's partly because I'm not a huge fan of westerns generally. Like, I would say it's maybe my least favourite subgenre, and this Back to the Future 3 has some amazing stuff going on, but I'm less fussed about the kind of western look and vibe of that film compared to the kind of amazing bonkers stuff that goes on in the first two, I suppose.
Yeah. And was that the hunting in the VHS, like Blockbuster's going to find Back to the Future? Or did you know it was coming?
Actually, my dad owned them on VHS, so they were part of his VHS collection. Yeah, my dad actually had a really good VHS collection, and there were some films that I was too young to see, but I was really obsessed with the video boxes. He had Terminator 1 and 2. He had Alien and Aliens. And I remember him telling me, he was like, oh, Aliens is the scariest film I've ever seen. You can't watch that until you're much older and stuff. And I remember really kind of building up Aliens in my mind as this thing that scared my dad more than anything else. But yeah, and actually, funnily enough, speaking again of sequels, I think my dad let me watch Terminator 2 before 1, because he sort of said 1 would be too dark and too scary. And it's much more of a sort of horror film in a way, right?
Yeah.
And 2, it has that kind of slightly more kind of fun action movie vibe. So I remember I watched the Terminator films quite young, and I watched them the wrong way round. I watched 2 before 1 because that was the one that I was allowed to watch. Yeah,
I think I watched 2 before 1. I think 2 is kind of it's almost acceptable. If you take the nuclear war, everyone getting burnt in a nuclear war bit out, then it's actually it's not too bad. Like it's
not too bad, yeah. Whereas the first one really does feel like a sort of slasher film, right? It was almost like Halloween, except Michael Myers was Arnold Schwarzenegger in the first one, and it is a lot scarier and darker. Yeah, the second one just has loads of cool motorbike stunts and other stuff, doesn't it? And Arnie being kind of friendly dad figure to Edward Furlong and everything as well. Yeah, it's great.
Was your dad a big horror fan? Is that where you got your love from horror from?
No, actually, like none of my family understand where I got my love of horror from. My dad likes, movies like Terminator and Aliens are kind of his limit. He loves sci-fi and action and kind of stuff that maybe slightly leans into horror. He would argue vehemently that Alien and Aliens aren't horror, which I would argue vehemently they are.
Alien is definitely a horror movie.
Exactly, right? Exactly.
100%.
But no, I had two older sisters who were quite considerably older than me. There's like a gap of about 8 and 10 years. And so they were teenagers when I was young, and I was first exposed to horror because they had rented Scream from their local video store. I would have been about 10 years old, and I watched it then, way too young to have watched it, but that was what got me obsessed with horror. And they were never that fussed about it, and neither was my parents. And I became completely addicted to horror movies. And I think especially off the back of watching Scream as my kind of gateway into horror, Scream is a movie that kind of reels off a bunch of horror movie titles for you to then want to check out, right? I remember watching Scream, thinking it was the best film I'd ever seen in my life. And but then also taking a mental note of what these characters kept talking about. Oh, A Nightmare on Elm Street. Oh, Halloween, Friday the 13th. And, then seeking them out either because they were on late on television and recording them off the television, or getting one of my older siblings to rent them from the video store for me, and spent most of my teenage years watching loads of crappy slasher franchises, basically.
Was Scream 2 a big deal to you then when it came out?
Massive, absolutely massive. Yeah, I was that was another one of those sequels I was just ridiculously
counting
excited
down,
for.
Yeah.
I still am. Like, even with Scream 6 earlier this year, I feel like a child again. I get that excited about a new Scream movie. And it's just one of those franchises that I love because of my love of horror, but also maybe there is some sort of nostalgic love there as well for me. But also, right, as far as horror series go, the batting average of the Scream movies is pretty good, right? Compared to Halloween or some of these other horror franchises that have 5, 6, 7 sequels. The Scream movies are all pretty good, right? I don't think there's been a truly terrible one yet. So I do always get really excited about a new Scream movie. Yeah, I know, right? I know. There's probably loads more to come. Yeah.
They're not going to stop that.
Six is great until the last kind of 20 minutes when it turns into Scooby-Doo.
Yeah. A few of them run the risk of. I mean, I think Scream 3 as well has a real Scooby-Doo vibe to it. There's a lot of kind of people running around big mansions and coming out of secret doorways and screaming and running and stuff, and it's all a bit silly. And it does, like, the Scream movies, I find, since the first one, haven't quite nailed that kind of comedy-horror balance as well as I want them to, But they're all so much fun. And Scream 2, back in, what was that, 1997 as well, was one that I was ridiculously excited for. Yeah.
What is your pick for best ever sequel?
So there's so many, right? And I'm sure, and I was trying to think of one that maybe less people might have mentioned on your podcast, because I did think of movies like Aliens, but I thought surely probably people have spoken to you about Aliens before. So I've gone with A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, Dream Warriors from 1987.
Brilliant.
Yeah. So had you guys seen this before?
I had never seen any Nightmare on Elm Street movie until this morning when I watched it.
Oh my god! So have you only seen Part 3 and not?
I've only seen Part 3. I haven't seen the first one.
Oh, you know who Freddy Krueger is, though, right?
I know who Freddy Krueger is. Yeah, and I know who Robert Englund is. But I'm like, that's it. That's as far as it goes.
Oh, this is incredible. Well, I when I was seeking out kind of slasher movies and teen horror movies as a kid, Nightmare on Elm Street, the original, was one of my absolute favourites, and I knew that it had something like 6. I think it had 6 sequels. Right, there were 7 Elm Street films at the time until we got the crappy 2010 sort of reboot, and I sort of made it my mission to seek them all out. And some of them are absolutely terrible, really, really, truly bad. As we get into parts 4, 5, and 6, particularly, they're really terrible. Part 2 is kind of weird and a bit stupid, and it's got some kind of interesting ideas, but it's not made very well. But part 3, I was like, oh my god, this is one of the coolest films I had ever seen as a kid, because it's sort of, I think it did what this franchise does so well, which is sort of mix true horror and some really nasty stuff with a kind of almost fantasy element. There's almost this feeling that these kids are like superheroes by the end.
Yeah.
And so, especially as a kid, I thought this film was amazing. And I think, you know, again, at their best, these films, they're teen slasher movies, but instead of just your bog standard man with a mask and a knife stabbing kids, they come up with these cool, inventive set pieces of ways to kill these kids, right? You know, everything that happens to these kids, Freddy Krueger, his MO is that he kills them in a dream. So anything can happen. There is dream logic. So people will get, you know, like in the first movie, Johnny Depp's character famously gets like dragged up onto the ceiling of the bedroom, and there's this amazing kind of surreal sequence where he's being killed upside down on the ceiling, or Heather Langenkamp's character gets dragged down into the bathtub. And in the third movie, it just feels like they have so much fun with some of the visuals and some of the set pieces. A moment involving a guy getting turned into a puppet via his kind of veins and arteries. Yeah, amazing. Or a girl who's obsessed with being on television getting a kind of head smashed into the TV. Like, there's these kind of outrageous and over-the-top violent set pieces in this, but there is something kind of creative and beautiful about it at the same time. Like, I really loved it. And you get like a real sense of character in this film, which again you don't get in a lot of horror sequels. You know, often it becomes about the body count, becomes about the killer, and they pay less and less attention to the writing, to the characters. But you've got characters in this played by people like Patricia Arquette and Lawrence Fishburne, who genuinely feel like characters and are well played. You know, these are good performances as well, you know. So yeah, I think it is one of the all-time great horror sequels.
Watching it for the first time today, I was like, that's where Stranger Things gets this from.
Yeah,
like
it's very
so,
Stranger Things.
It is. Like even the main character's called Nancy. Like, you know, and she looks exactly like Nancy from Stranger Things, right?
The big curly hair. Yeah, absolutely.
Like, this is the dream thing, like a different state. It all kind of like fits together. And you're right. It did feel like, it almost felt like Freddy was wasn't the main character kind of thing. Like you said, like other horror movies, like the killer's the main character, whereas this actually felt like the characters were the main characters. And
yes.
You know.
Yeah, and actually, like, the thing I love about this wasn't directed by Wes Craven, it was directed by Chuck Russell, who, again, really fascinating director. He would go on to make stuff like The Mask in the 90s, but he's clearly this kind of, like, very visually creative, imaginative director. But the story was by Wes Craven, and Wes Craven obviously wrote and directed the first one. He created Freddy Krueger as a character. He made this character based off his own kind of fears and anxieties. He read these kind of news stories about these children that were dying in their sleep, apparently from nightmares, and that they found in these kids' bedrooms these kind of coffee machines and stuff where they had been secretly trying to keep themselves awake because they were too scared to go to sleep, and then they did actually end up dying in their sleep. So there was this kind of weird element of truth to what Wes Craven based his first film on. And he based Freddy Krueger on this man that he once saw as a child. He looked out of his window in the middle of the night and he saw this man, I think he was a homeless man, stood in his backyard, and he was wearing this kind of old stripy sweater and this hat, and he was just staring up at him in through his window in the middle of the night, and it freaked Wes Craven out, and he apparently never forgot it. So he kind of drew from all these kind of real life things that scared him to create A Nightmare on Elm Street. And the original Nightmare on Elm Street is truly supposed to be this very, very scary movie, this very frightening idea of these young children dying in their sleep by this kind of really menacing man. And Freddy Krueger doesn't get a lot of screen time in the first one. You don't see a lot of him. He's kind of in the shadows and he's very menacing. And then obviously we know what happened with Freddy Krueger in that, you know, by the time you get to part 4, 5, 6, he became like an action figure. You could buy lunchboxes for kids with Freddy Krueger on them. You know, you could there was like cartoons, there was video games. He became like a pop culture icon. And part 3 was just before that wave, and even though you can see elements of Freddy Krueger starting to become a bit kind of wisecracky in this movie, and he does have a few kind of one-liners and
Yeah.
stuff. But for Wes Craven, who was absent for the second movie, came back to do the story of this third movie, and I think it feels a little bit more rooted in something real again. Wes Craven making a film about something genuinely human and frightening, which is this idea of these kids, in this hospital, the way they're being ignored by the adults, the way that the staff at the hospital don't take them seriously, and the way they all kind of find each other. There's a real Wes Craven element to that too. I think there's often this theme of kind of absent parents in all of his films and that kind of thing, and sort of tapping into real childhood fears. So yeah, I love that it's got that Wes Craven vibe again in this one, where it feels like he's bringing it back to something that truly frightens him again. But also Chuck Russell's direction, which is just bonkers and fun and imaginative.
It's so much fun.
Yeah.
I was like Rich. I think I've watched the original, and I might have watched a couple of more, but I can't remember tell you which one's which at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And me and Rich have quite famously grown to be not like horror films, but scaredy cats. I think.
Yeah. I think the older I get, the more scared of stuff I am.
Yeah,
and I don't. It really Kids in Peril really gets to me as well. Since I've had kids,
yes,
Kids in Peril's oh no, but teenagers I can just about handle.
Yeah.
So
I think the thought of watching something which is so iconic and historic, and you've heard so much about, is worse than actually what's on screen, because this is literally nothing what I thought it was going to be like when I actually watched it. Like you said, the creative set pieces are weirdly so much fun, and you're kind of looking forward to the next one to see how the next kid dies. Like the drug addict girl. It's pretty horrible.
It is. There's that other thing, right, where they're all being preyed upon for their own personal traumas and weaknesses as well. Again, it feels kind of thought about in that regard, which a lot of the rest of the sequels kind of aren't in that way. And again, visually, it's just some weird stuff. There's a whole almost kind of Ray Harryhausen stop motion skeleton fight at the end and stuff, and you're just like, what is happening? Again, it's not the sort of stuff you expect to see in a sort of 80s slasher sequel, and I love it for that.
I like the mirror hall bit. I thought that was very cleverly done. I have to say, some of the acting hasn't dated well.
Yeah. No, some of it's not great. I mean, believe me when I say it's still better than a lot of the other sequels.
That's scary.
And I think that's because it's got a few recognisable names. So this is the first movie that brings Nancy back. So Nancy, Heather Langenkamp's character, was the star of the first one. She was the sort of final girl of part one as a teenager. Again, part two, completely different, all new characters, has nothing to do with the first one. So this movie feels like a true sequel in that it brings her back. It brings back John Saxon, who plays her father in this. And then you've also got people like Patricia Arquette and Lawrence Fishburne, or Larry Fishburne as he's credited in this movie, who are good and feel like they bring a bit of weight to it. But you're right, some of the other performances are a bit wobbly here and there, for sure.
Yeah. So how did you watch this? Was this the sisters renting it for you?
It was on telly. I remember it was on late one night on, I think, BBC, BBC 1 or 2, really late at night.
Nice.
I used to always scan the Radio Times every week, to find out what might be on at any given, on any given night at sort of 1 a.m. or something. It tended to be when those sorts of films were played. And this movie was on late one night on TV, so I would have to set the old VCR recorder up, set it all up to record. And it's always a bit of a gamble, wasn't it, as to whether or not that would actually work. And it would always be a bit of a tense moment the next morning when I'd come downstairs and be like, did it record this film I was desperate to see? But yeah, it did. And I remember then waking up excitedly and watching it the next morning and being absolutely blown away by it. I loved it.
I have to ask the order you've watched them, because if you're just going to try and catch them on TV, had you watched the original by this point?
I'd seen the original, and I think I'd seen part 2.
Okay, you're on a good run
so I had sort of seen them in order roughly. I think from this point onwards, the order went out the window. I think I saw Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare, which is the 6th one, before parts 4 and 5. I think I then saw part 7, Wes Craven's New Nightmare, before I saw part 5. So it all went a bit all over the place after that. But I think I definitely saw 1, 2, and 3 in order, because I remember thinking 2 was really, really not great and really kind of spoiled what was great about the first one. And then I remember seeing part 3 and thinking, holy shit, what an amazing return to form this is, and absolutely loving it.
And that was pretty much down to Wes Craven, because I was reading about it today, and he was like, he was so disappointed with the response to the second one that he had nothing to do with it. He was like, well, if they're going to do it, I might as well write it.
Yeah. He and honestly, like, I mean, he is one of my favorite directors. We talked about Scream already, but I think there's this feeling with Wes Craven where he only wants to make a horror film about something if he feels like there's a reason to do it. He was never that fussed about making these kind of countless Freddy sequels if there wasn't a decent idea at the heart of it, and he wanted to come up with something that was a new, frightening idea that he found effective. And so I think you really feel that in his films whenever he comes back to kind of write the story or direct a movie.
Were you happy when it ended? Like the not, which one am I talking about? New Nightmare, and then they brought back Freddy versus Jason. How do you feel about Freddy versus Jason?
Freddy versus Jason
he's
is
the
not
good guy, right? In this
film? Freddy versus Jason is not great, but it was sort of fun and exciting at the time because it was a cool thing bringing these two franchises together. It was just a shame that it wasn't executed as well as it could have been, really. You know, I feel like maybe now, if given the chance, you know, especially in a world of kind of Marvel and crossovers everywhere, I feel like it could be done better if someone else had a better go of it. You know, at the time it was just a bit. I think the production was all a bit rushed and troubled, and there were rights issues with who owned Jason and who owned Freddy, and it was kind of cobbled together and not that great ultimately. So it was a shame, but it's a fun idea. It was a fun concept.
So in Freddy versus Jason, Freddy, the paedophile child murderer, is the good guy.
No, he's still not a good guy. But that is a problematic thing that, again, this paedophile child molesting murderer did become a kind of pop culture icon, right? And no, I think actually, if anything, Freddy versus Jason leans more into Jason being the more sympathetic character and Freddy being the more sort of evil one of the two of them. But even so, Freddy Krueger does get these kind of fun wisecracks and nods to the camera and literal winks to the camera. There's a moment when he is beheaded and his decapitated head winks at the camera. You know, it got that kind of cheesy as the movies went on.
Setting it up for a sequel that never came on that one, I think.
Yeah, exactly. But what I will recommend is, because Freddy's Dead was terrible, that was the kind of literal nail in the coffin of that franchise. But then Wes Craven returned once more to do Wes Craven's New Nightmare in the mid-90s and did something really brilliant, and kind of did something that he would go on to do with Scream a couple of years later, where he made one of the earliest kind of meta horror movies. So he essentially brought back all the original cast. So Nancy comes back, Heather Langenkamp, except it's set in the quote-unquote real world. So she is playing herself as actress Heather Langenkamp, who starred in the Nightmare on Elm Street films, and it's set in Hollywood, and it's about the effect of horror on viewers, essentially. And it's about Heather Langenkamp as a mother with a young child, and her son accidentally watches A Nightmare on Elm Street when he's too young, and the effect it has on him. Wow. And Wes Craven is in it as himself, and he's talking about this idea of Freddy used to be this frightening thing, that then people kind of lost what the true horror of him was about. And now there is this kind of supernatural element where this evil has been let loose into the world because Freddy was the way to kind of contain it. It got a bit silly and fantastical, but it has a really cool idea at its heart, which is this idea of sequels kind of diluting what made this creation kind of frightening, and Wes Craven trying to kind of reclaim that and bring it back to being something frightening and real again, which is very, very cool.
And Wes Craven plays Wes Craven, doesn't he?
Yeah, everyone's in it as themselves. Robert Englund is in it as himself. Wes Craven, John Saxon comes back as himself as well. So all of these actors from the first movie and the third movie are back. So yeah, what I always recommend to people is basically stick with the Wes Craven trilogy of Elm Street films, which is part 1, 3, and New Nightmare.
Oh, interesting.
Ignore all of the rest, and they actually work as like a really perfect little trilogy, essentially.
Yeah, because that was kind of like a legacy sequel before legacy sequels and now a thing, right?
Yeah, completely. A kind of meta legacy sequel thing. And it really does feel like a forerunner to Scream. It talks all about the kind of violence in movies and horror cinema, and there's a lot of nods to other horror franchises. Yeah. There's a whole subplot with the actress Heather Langenkamp being stalked by someone obsessed with the movies, and there's like menacing phone calls and stuff. So it kind of feels like he was gearing up to this kind of postmodern 90s vibe that he would go on to make famous with Scream. Yeah.
So there has been a remake, but now legacy sequels are so in and so cool, and it's the thing to do. Are you worried that one day they're going to get round to this?
I mean, in some ways,
how
I
do you
think
feel about that?
Well, I would always be open-minded to it because I love the idea of Elm Street. Again, this idea that filmmakers could be completely creative and bonkers by creating something truly nightmarish again. And I feel like over the last few years, we've talked about this a lot on my podcast and just, in the kind of horror world. Horror is going through a bit of a golden age right now. We are really in the midst of some truly brilliant creative people making truly frightening stuff. Ari Aster, Jordan Peele, Mike Flanagan, Julia
Commercial
Ducournau,
stuff as well,
Jennifer Kent. Yeah, these people that are making stuff that is weird and bold and frightening and interesting and is usually about something as well. Again, Jordan Peele is like the perfect example of that. And I feel like in some ways now is a better time than ever to maybe bring back this idea of this nightmarish figure who haunts children. And I feel like somebody could do it now in a successful way, maybe, that they didn't in 2010. In sort of in the late 2000s, early 2010s, it felt like there was a lot of just reboots and remakes being churned out for kind of cynical reasons. We had a remake of Texas Chainsaw, The Hills Have Eyes, The Fog. We had Rob Zombie's Halloween films. We had Friday the 13th. There was this wave of really bad, just like studio churned remakes and sequels that were really bad. Whereas I think now we're in a much more interesting creative place. And yeah, if somebody did it right, I would absolutely welcome. If Robert Eggers, for example, decided he wanted to make, or Ari Aster decided they wanted to make some truly weird, nightmarish, Nightmare on Elm Street movie, I'd be all for it, definitely.
Because the premise is fucking scary. Like the idea you're not safe in your dreams is
It is, and it gives filmmakers this freedom to be as weird and creative as they want as well, So it's an awesome idea. It's just got to be executed well, I think.
And I mean, there is this. I mean, we've talked about Evil Dead a little bit, and Evil Dead Rise and that kind of thing coming back. And
that's another great example. Yeah,
there is this comic book of. But apparently it's a Freddy versus Jason Evil Dead crossover comic book.
So
you never know. They could all come back in the same kind of universe.
Exactly. You never know. I don't know how any of that makes sense, to be honest. But I would also welcome it for sure.
What is your most disappointing sequel? So it's not your worst sequel. It doesn't even have to be a bad sequel. But what is the sequel that's left you the most disappointed? I mean, we spoke about The Lost World earlier. And that was disappointing. But is there anything else that you can think of?
Yeah, interesting. I'm sorry to name another horror because my brain always just goes straight to horror.
We don't have enough horror on this podcast.
Okay, great. Well, there you go. You're about to have an overload of horror now. But
Wicked.
The one that immediately comes to mind, speaking of, this is kind of slightly going against what I just talked about how we're in a bit of a golden age of horror, but not the biggest fan of the Blumhouse Halloween sequels that have come out over the last few years, David Gordon Green Halloween movies. They've been pretty rubbish, to be honest. And like the first one was okay and it had some fun elements about it, but I think like many other people did feel that slight disappointment that they weren't quite as good as they could have been, I suppose. Halloween is such a difficult one because compared to Nightmare on Elm Street, where it feels like you can be weird and creative and take the story in bold new directions like they did in Dream Warriors, Halloween is so simple. The point of it is just a man in a white mask that stalks babysitters on Halloween night. And there's only so much you can do with that premise, right? So it's actually amazing that there have been about 12, 13 of those films that are essentially the same thing over and over again, right? So I think, I as much as I still kind of get excited at the idea of a new Halloween film, I always find myself slightly disappointed that it's never as good as I want it to be.
Yeah. Was it Kills or Ends that really disappointed you? Was it the ending?
It was all of them really, but in a weird different way. So I think Kills is probably the worst of the three of them. The middle chapter, it's pretty ridiculous and just really, really badly written, I would say. And then Ends is quite a controversial one, the one that just came out. Some fans really, really hated it and said it was the worst in the whole franchise because it essentially kind of veers away from Michael Myers completely and kind of focuses on a new character. I actually didn't mind that so much. I kind of welcomed it taking it into a new direction. And by then, my sort of expectations were so low that I didn't really care. So I think for me, it was probably the second one. It was Halloween Kills that was the most disappointing of the bunch.
Yeah.
That's when it came superhuman more, wasn't it?
Yeah.
He took out one fireman after another, but they didn't seem to all attack him at once. They all took their turn to get killed.
And it feels like that franchise doesn't really know what to do with Jamie Lee Curtis. Like, she just kind of lies in a hospital bed throughout that whole film, kills, and just shouts "Evil dies tonight" occasionally. Like, it's quite a badly written film.
That's
I think it's Kills to Ends is weird because Kills, he's like superhuman. So Michael Myers is superhuman, and then it ends. He's like a little old man.
Yeah.
Like, he's all
ineffectual.
decrepit
and in the sewers. Yeah, it was so weird. One of my friends recently made the good point that it's almost like that trilogy would have worked better in reverse. You know, like, begin it with 40 years later, Michael Myers is this weird shadowy thing that's weak and has lived in the sewers hiding this whole time. Then go to Halloween Kills, where it begins to escalate, and then end with the kind of classic Halloween night. Michael Myers is back and killing babysitters again. And it kind of brings it back to the original as an end point almost, and end with that end sequence of the first David Gordon Green one where Jamie Lee Curtis sets booby traps in her house and blows him up, and that's where it ends, right? That would almost make more sense.
It's quite a fun movie, right? That first one, like...
it is quite fun. It is quite fun, exactly. Yeah, so it's a really strange, disjointed trilogy of films. That trilogy. Yeah.
Do you think they had the idea of the last film in that trilogy when they wrote the first one? So they always had that Evan kid or whatever it was.
Yeah. It doesn't feel like it, right? It doesn't feel planned. But yeah, I interviewed David Gordon Green for my podcast, and he said that essentially he always had the idea that it was going to be 2 films. And then the first one did really well, and Blumhouse were like, let's make 3. And so they kind of shoved in that middle chapter, Halloween Kills, where he sort of said, we knew where this trilogy started, we knew where it ultimately ended. Part 2 was just us having fun, and I can't remember what he said. He said something like tearing open the toy box and throwing shit everywhere was how David Gordon Green described making Halloween Kills. So I was like, right. He knows exactly what that film is then. Right, okay, fine. Throwing shit everywhere is how he described it. So, yeah.
That's good. Because I think the second one is just a bunch of annoying people, just you want to die.
Yeah, pretty bad.
If they did another Halloween, how would you go about that?
Well, and this is going to link a little bit to what I'm going to talk about later with my dream sequel, but I would like to see a completely different story. Enough Michael Myers, enough Haddonfield, enough Laurie Strode. Like, back in the day, you know, John Carpenter made Halloween and Halloween 2.
Yeah.
They kind of followed the same story. At the end of Halloween 2, Michael Myers died. He exploded, and that was it. It was the end of that story. And then they made Halloween 3 that was called Season of the Witch, which was an entirely different story. It was like a kind of supernatural kind of witches story, kind of mixed with a bit of sci-fi. And it was entirely its own thing. And the idea that John Carpenter had was that Halloween as a franchise was going to continue as almost like an anthology series, where each movie was going to be an entirely new story made by a different director, centered on Halloween, but it was going to be something completely different each time. And I think that, but of course, everyone hated Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, because they said, where the hell is Michael Myers? So a few years later, we got Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers, and that's literally what it was called. And then that was where the series became all about him. But I always wanted to bring it back to that idea of, you know, Halloween could be about anything. The title is so generic, right? Let's have a film called Halloween that is something entirely unrelated to this man in a white mask with a kitchen knife. You know, I feel like we've done enough with him by this point.
Yeah, put him to rest for a while.
Yeah, I think so.
He deserves to die.
Yeah.
What is been your worst ever sequel?
Oh, okay, so I've gone with one that came immediately to mind as one that I saw very recently, and I was unspeakably angry at this movie. And it links to what I was saying a little bit earlier about one of my first ever sequel experiences, but this is Jurassic World Dominion from 2022, right? It was last year, I think.
It was last year.
Have you guys seen this, I take it?
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
My God.
I think it might be the most picked for worst sequel.
Is
seeing
it?
as it only came out last year.
Oh, wow. Okay.
There's a lot of hate.
Yeah, there's a lot of hate.
From
God.
us. We reviewed it as well and we hated it. So
It's dreadful, isn't it? It's really a film with almost nothing to recommend it. And I think these Jurassic World movies have been, again, you know, it's a little bit like that recent Halloween trilogy. They've been a very weird, clunky trilogy of films, I think, right? Where Colin Trevorrow, I always forget how to pronounce his surname, but he did the original Jurassic World that was that kind of reboot, right? Brought legacy sequel, brought it back to, you know, the park is open, the dinosaurs are back. It was a cool idea, but like, again, wasn't brilliantly well made, I think, you know, not as good as it could have been. And then we get that weird middle sequel directed by, I think it's J.A. Bayona, right, who had made movies like The Orphanage and made these kind of creepy gothic haunted house films. And he did almost turn Jurassic World into this creepy gothic haunted house story, right?
Yeah.
And it's very camp and stupid, but I kind of enjoyed it in a kind of silly, fun way, and I think it had some cool visual moments. And then we get Jurassic World Dominion, which is supposed to be the final chapter in this trilogy, the most epic. You know, the previous movie had promised that the dinosaurs are out, they are on the loose. So we're finally going to see what it's like to be in this world in which humans have to coexist with dinosaurs.
Yeah.
That was a really cool idea. I was really excited to see how that would pan out. And then, on top of all the other excitement, they announced that Laura Dern, Sam Neill, and Jeff Goldblum would all be returning, you know, mixed in with the rubbish cast of the new ones, Bryce Dallas Howard and Chris Pratt, who no one really likes, right?
No.
So, but I was like, brilliant, they're bringing back the 3 original cast members who we loved.
the people you want to see, yeah.
Yeah, people actually want to see. We're going to have dinosaurs on the loose in the modern world. Oh my God, what's that going to look like? It had so much promise. And it was one of the worst, most disappointing things I've ever seen in my life. Like, how did they manage to get it as wrong as they did? It's almost impressive at how bad they managed to make that film, considering how much potential it had, I think.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And we've said this a few times, is that me and Dave, our big thing was we wanted The Walking Dead, but with dinosaurs instead of zombies.
Yes!
You know,
yes.
that's and I think that's what everyone wanted. An actual Jurassic World.
Right.
You know, you've called it Jurassic World. Yeah. Why have you put in another bloody park?
Well, yeah, they put it back in a compound, right? So that in itself was a disappointment because we weren't roaming around the world with dinosaurs. They actually made it less about dinosaurs and more about locusts. What? Whose decision was that?
I don't get the locust
They decided
thing.
to make this really boring story about the ecosystem and crops being ruined by locusts. It's like, what's that got to do with anything?
And so completely obvious as well.
Yeah.
It's like, all the crops that aren't biosyn are getting eaten by locusts. I wonder who made the locusts.
Yeah.
Could it be the company called Biosyn, who may as well be called We Are the Baddies Corp? Like,
Biosyn! Biosyn, I know. And you've got boring Chris Pratt and boring Bryce Dallas Howard being boring in this film on their motorbikes, training velociraptors to be good. That annoys me. And then you've got Laura Dern and Jeff Goldblum and Sam Neill, who are all just, they don't really get given anything fun to do. You know, while these other characters are kind of running around this compound doing dinosaur stuff, they spend a lot of it in labs trying to steal samples or, you know, find the locusts. And
Jeff Goldblum barely in it. Like,
barely
he's not doing anything.
Right?
Like,
and the moments that they do have feel sort of badly written, and it does that really annoying thing where it tries to kind of harken back to the first one in a really kind of abhorrent way. Like, there's the moment when Laura Dern gets out of the car and sees the ruined crop fields, and she stands up from the car and lifts her sunglasses as a visual nod to the first one. Except in this one, all she's looking at is an empty cornfield. And it's like, what's that for? Who's that for? You know, it's just I was so cross at this film.
The film is full of that bits, isn't it? The bit when
the
T-Rex gets in the circle bit and you're like, don't you do it.
Don't you do it. Don't you do
it.
it. Honestly, dinosaurs are so cool. How is it that they've managed to make so many bad films about dinosaurs in this franchise? Like, you know, there are some sequels that are more fun than others, but none of them really have come close to the original. And it's like, how is every entry got it so wrong? And this last one particularly got it more wrong than any of the others. It's like, just give us scary dinosaurs. That's all we want. And most of the films are so focused on the other stuff. You know, the first Jurassic World film was about that Indominus Rex, about them creating a man-made dinosaur. Why? Like, all the other dinosaurs are cool enough as it is, you know.
And they're all man-made anyway.
Yeah, like it's just, I don't know, it's weird. It's like every time they somehow get it so wrong. It's weird.
It's talking about like horror, because the raptors were so scary in the first, second film. So scary. It gave me horrific nightmares when I was a boy.
Yeah.
And now we've got to this point and they're fucking puppy dogs.
What the hell? Who came up with that idea to train them and make them good? Yeah, I don't understand that, because you're right. You know, the set piece in the kitchen of the first film where the children are being stalked by velociraptors, that is pure like horror set piece, isn't it? That is one of the scariest moments in cinema. And to go from that to Chris Pratt riding on a motorcycle surrounded by his pet velociraptors as like a kind of cool hero shot, I'm just like, what is this? What are they doing? It's really, really sad.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it lacks a memorable set piece. Like, you can remember lots of stuff from the first film, even the second film, even the third film. It has pterodactyls in, and you think,
I think it does have a memorable set piece, but not for really good reasons.
Okay, what have you
So
got?
like the Malta set piece, I think is quite a good one, but
That's not for dinosaurs.
Yeah.
only because it's basically, it's like they've gone, do you know what would be Mission Impossible with dinosaurs would be interesting, wouldn't it? Let's do that for 5 minutes and then completely ignore it.
Plus, you see dinosaurs on the street at that point and you think, oh, dinosaurs are loose.
Yeah, do you know what? That's true. At least that gives us something close to what we thought might be the film we were getting, right? You're right, kind of on the loose in a city, a kind of dinosaur chase. But you're right, it was like it was trying to be the Bourne Identity with dinosaurs or something. Like, again, it was just, they just made so many weird story choices in this film that I just didn't understand. Yeah, very. And this thing of trying to juggle its kind of new cast with its legacy cast as well. And ultimately, again, like, it was like Laura Dern and Sam Neill and Jeff Goldblum showed up for like 3 days of filming.
Well, not only did they have to juggle getting them all schedule-wise, they had to juggle scheduling that in a pandemic.
Yes.
So
yes. I guess that's the other reason, maybe.
We spoke to someone else yesterday about this, and they could only have a certain amount of people on set at certain times. So it's pretty remarkable that they've made a film at all, to be honest. And it does beg the question is, should they have just waited? Yeah.
I know. Well, that's the other thing, right? It's like, it felt like that was their one chance. That was their one chance to make a really cool dinosaurs roaming around the earth with Sam Neill, Laura Dern, and Jeff Goldblum in it. And that's the other thing that is so awful about it, is that like they had one shot at making this great and they've wasted it. You know, it's such a shame. And we'll probably never get that again.
No. So when you knew it was coming, and you know all that information's in front of you. You know, they even released a couple of like short films. There's one called Camp Rock that looked quite good.
Yeah.
And then a teaser of the T-Rex at like a cinema, and you think, oh my God, this could be really good. And then, did you go to the press screening of it?
I did. I remember seeing it at the press screening in Leicester Square. You know, packed out with
Did they give you drinks beforehand? Was it?
Oh, loads of drinks.
There we go. Here we go.
Packed out with excited journalists and influencers and all that kind of thing, you know. And, you know, there are times when I'll go see a film and I'm so wrapped up in the excitement of it that I will come out and go, that was great. And then a few days will pass and I'll go, was it that great? Was it good? And I'll think about it more and more. And the more I think about it, the worse it gets. And then I'll go and watch it a second time months later and go, oh no, actually that was quite bad. But I was so wrapped up in the excitement of, you know, a long-awaited film, or the spectacle of it, or the fact that it was a press screening with free booze, whatever it might be, that influences my decision, right? But Jurassic World Dominion, despite the fact that it was a fun Leicester Square screening, there was free stuff, I was so excited as a lifelong Jurassic Park fan. And I remember even then turning to the person next to me about 1 hour in out of the 3 hours and being like, this is really, really bad. And like knowing even at the time, even amidst all the excitement, that this was a truly bad film, you know. It was nothing could have covered that up or shrouded that for me. It was a truly terrible sequel.
Have you been burnt? Would you go back to a Jurassic Park now, world, whatever we're going to call it? Jurassic Kingdom? I don't know what they could call the next one.
I think I would, actually. And do you know what? I actually went... This is terrible, but I actually went to see it a second time, Jurassic World Dominion, because I was podcasting about it, and I thought to myself... Was I too mean and had I had too much free booze? So I actually paid money to go watch it a second time at my local cinema to think, let's give this another go with different expectations. Is it going to be as bad as I remember it being? Yes, it was. It was maybe even worse. So, yes, not only did I pay to go and see it again, I actually probably still would pay to go watch another Jurassic Park or Jurassic World movie.
So would I. So would
I know. I can't help it. I can't. It's it's weird, isn't it? But I just think again the first one was so important in my life, and the idea of dinosaurs is just always so cool, right?
So
just
cool.
just make some more cool dinosaur movies,
And,
yeah.
and we might get another one because it made over $1 billion.
Of course, we'll get another one.
They're going to do it, aren't they?
Well, that was the other thing, right? Because it kind of ended right with what the previous one promised, which was that, like, oh, dinosaurs are loose and it's a whole new world we've got to live in. And it was like, hang on, I thought that was what the last movie promised.
Yeah.
It feels like we still haven't quite had that sequel yet.
And I'd love to see that sequel.
Yeah.
I'd go see it, and just not without Chris Pratt. And just some new characters, maybe.
Give us a whole new cast. I don't know, give it some cool high concept thing, like we're in an apartment block and there's dinosaurs and we've got to escape, or just like some fun, like high concept, simple kind of horror action movie with monsters. I feel like that's all we need.
Do you think it would work well as a TV series, and each episode's a different part of the world or something?
Yeah, that would be cool, wouldn't it? It would be a really expensive
that
TV
Apple
show.
TV.
Yeah.
I don't know if you watched it, Prehistoric Beasts or whatever it's called.
Oh, I haven't seen that.
The CGI is so good in it, and I've cried over many dinosaurs in that program.
Yes.
It's really good. I'll just give it to Apple and let them have a go at that. That would be my...
Yeah.
What is your worst point of Jurassic Park World Dominion? I don't know.
Oh, man, worst point.
And we'll close it on that.
Um,
What really, really grinds your gears?
It might be that moment I talked about where Laura Dern takes her sunglasses off and then looks at an empty cornfield that's been mauled by locusts, because it kind of sums up everything that is bad about that film. It's like pointless nostalgia, no dinosaurs, locusts, boring, and just like cynically nostalgic,
Yeah. I stand by some... The locust bit, if it was in a different film, might be quite good.
Yeah.
But not in this film.
Not in this film. No, thank you.
What is the sequel that you've made you come back to a franchise? Or so you didn't like the first one or the second one, but 3, 4, 6, 2, you think, oh, that's quite good. We had someone the other day talk about Top Gun 2. The third Planet of the Apes is probably better, well, much better than Beneath the Planet of the Apes.
Yeah, that's a good one, actually.
And you watch a lot of horror, so horrors, they drag those bad boys out.
Oh, they do. Yeah, I'm sure there've been probably some horror franchises that have done this to me. Saw springs to mind, right? There were 7, 8, possibly 9 Saw films.
I've lost count now.
I think there might be 9 now, including that Chris Rock reboot a few years ago, Spiral. And it really dips in the middle. My God, I Saw 4 is a real low point. It's a really, really bad movie. But then I think Saw 5 actually goes, oh, this is actually quite interesting. Let's do some new fun stuff with it. So that was one that kind of sprung to mind for me, where, again, some of these franchises where it just all depends on who's writing it and who's directing it, and it can be quite random, where you'll get these kind of bad ones in the middle, then you'll get the occasional good one, and then it will go bad again. A little bit like with Dream Warriors in the middle of that Elm Street series, where every time you think you're out, it might pull you back in with a good or an interesting one, Yeah.
Like the police academies.
Exactly that, yeah.
Would you... I'm trying to think how to get this. What makes you go back to a sequel like that? Why haven't you stopped watching it, Mike? Like, why? What brings you back? Is it the hope that kills us?
I think it probably is, right? I think usually it has to be a movie where I liked the first one enough for it to really have an impact on me. So I'm trying to think if there are any franchises or movie series that I loved that then I completely gave up on. I have given up on Marvel films, to be honest.
Okay.
I don't think I've seen a Marvel film at the cinema since Endgame. And it's partly because I'm just not the biggest Marvel fan, but also I feel like the quality has dipped since then.
You're not wrong.
I've watched a couple at home, and I've just thought to myself, do you know what? This isn't for me. I don't really care anymore. I don't feel any need to watch any more of these films. And people have told me that Guardians 3 is very good.
Yeah,
I don't care. For me, again, I don't care about Chris Pratt. I was sort of done with the Guardians films after Part 2. I was sort of done with the Avengers after Endgame, and I don't really feel the need to watch another Guardians of the Galaxy film. So those are the sort of some of the movie series that I feel pretty much done with, I think, where I don't need to watch.
So you save them for at home when you've got to spare a couple of hours?
A couple of them I've watched them at home. Some of them I've never watched at all. I've never seen The Eternals. I've never...
That's a long one.
Yeah, I can't, who has the time? I've never seen Shang-Chi. Is it Shang-Chi?
That's
never
fun.
Seen
that's okay. That's quite
okay.
a fun one.
If
Yeah.
you like Pokemon, you'll love it.
Okay, yeah. Don't love Pokemon, but okay.
There's something that happens in the Eternals. It's quite a big an event. And
Yeah.
it's been about 7 films since the Eternals, and they have no one's mentioned it.
No, not at all.
It's bizarre. The Guardians Volume 3 is actually quite good, and it's quite dark.
Yeah,
There are darker themes, if that's
It's one of the
thing.
best ones since Endgame.
It is the
Okay,
best.
that's good to know.
It is the best one since
I liked the Spider-Verse, the Spider.
Yeah, they're fun.
You know, that was fun, and I liked. I'll tell you what I really didn't like, which this one made me cross. Which I did go to see at a press screening, was the Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness.
Yes.
Which was all promised as being this, like, Marvel does horror. They've got Sam Raimi. I hated it. And again, like, for me,
rubbish,
it gave me everything that makes me cross about a Marvel film, which was that it felt so... It was basically just a big, kind of meringue of CGI multiverse hopping with shoving in characters that were just there to make Marvel fans cheer, but not there to serve the purpose of a story. So throwing in Professor Xavier or whoever that was, you know, all those people. And it didn't really seem to have an interesting contained storyline. And also the promise that it was going to be horror was nonsense to me as well, really.
Just
like,
Sam
I really
Raimi
didn't
was
like
involved,
it.
wasn't it?
Yeah, like it did nothing for me, that movie. So yeah, like I've not seen the latest Thor movie.
Don't. It's really bad.
I'm sort of these are a lot of the franchises that have really kind of.
Is there a
put me
character
off.
that would bring you back though? I know it's not your thing.
I loved probably one of my favorite things in the whole of the Marvel verse that I have watched is television is WandaVision.
Yeah.
I thought that was so brilliant. Like it used the medium of television to tell a completely different and interesting story, and I loved it. I loved the way that it took you through these kind of weird, almost Lynchian versions of like sitcoms, and then it expanded into this bigger world, and it told an interesting, like, sort of emotional storyline about Wanda and what she was going through with her kids and her family. And for me, it ticked all the boxes that I want in a Marvel story. It has a kind of cool, larger universe. It has some cool, magic and fantasy, but it has kind of an emotional character arc at the center of it, and I loved it. And again, I kind of feel like they completely sort of shit all over that with Doctor Strange, with what they did with Wanda. So I would see a second season of WandaVision. That's what I would go back
I think Marvel
to.
TV is a lot better than Marvel movies right now.
Maybe.
Like, there's a lot, but the TV shows are a lot better quality.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Yeah.
What is your dream sequel?
Okay, well, obviously, I've gone back to horror here, and I find this is actually, I'm sure people have told you this before, but I think this is the hardest one to answer, because so many of my favourite films that don't have sequels, I would never really want them to have sequels. I think often that's the beauty of them, right? Is that when I think of some of my favourite, for example, recent horror movies like Hereditary, like Get Out, I do not want to see sequels to those films. Or, some of my favourite non-horror movies are films like Whiplash, Damien Chazelle's Whiplash. Again, never want to see a sequel to that. It's like they're one and done for me. But a really interesting kind of subgenre of horror is the anthology horror movie, right? And the kind of horror movies that consist of lots of little mini stories. And some of the most famous ones are for example, the VHS movies do this. They're sort of found footage and anthology films. Creep Show from the 80s by George Romero was one of these. And I guess they sort of follow a similar kind of structure to TV shows like The Twilight Zone and Black Mirror, Inside Number 9, these kind of like different stories, unrelated stories. And so I thought one that really kind of would interest me is a sequel to a film called Trick or Treat, or Trick or Treat, from, I don't know, about 10, 15 years ago. And this was a film that kind of sort of came out of nowhere and didn't really cause much of a stir when it first came out. It's this kind of anthology movie. It's directed by Michael Dougherty, and it stars people like Anna Paquin and Dylan Baker. Brian Cox is in it. It's got a really fun cast, and it really kind of captures a kind of Halloween spookiness that I love.
Yeah.
That doesn't. Again, it goes back to this thing that I was saying about the Halloween movies, where Blumhouse, in a way, wasted an opportunity, I think, to resurrect the Halloween franchise and make each movie a new low-budget story directed by somebody young and new and different, doing different Halloween tales, like Halloween spooky tales. And maybe Trick or Treat is the franchise to do that with, because it presents us with these 5 interwoven stories that all happen on one Halloween night, and they're all connected by this very creepy character called Sam, this like little creepy child who has a kind of jack-o'-lantern mask, carries this little sack with him, and there is a kind of bigger mythology of Sam kind of running underneath this, but we only kind of scratch the surface of it in amongst these other kind of fun spooky tales. And so I feel like of all the things to get sequels, I would love to see something like this. I feel like it could really work, even if it went straight to Netflix, right? And we got every October, every Halloween, a new Trick or Treat movie, 5 little, unrelated stories, loosely connected, each one directed by a different filmmaker. Beautiful. That all gave us like a fun supernatural tale of horror, right? Like I feel like there's such a gap for that, and I think it would work really well.
Yeah, like a real life live action Simpsons Treehouse of Horror.
Exactly, exactly that. Basically, Treehouse of Horror live action. Exactly that. Like, and with a bit of budget behind it, I think it would do really well. I feel like there is weirdly, and I think this is because of Michael Myers. I think there is a weird lack of horror stories set on Halloween. Like we don't really get. I feel like filmmakers are not utilizing the holiday of Halloween as much as they
Halloween's
could be.
getting massive now. I remember when I was a child and it wasn't really a thing, but even in the UK, America, it's always been quite big.
Exactly.
In the UK now, Halloween is a massive thing as well.
It is. It's become a proper holiday, hasn't it? And I think the look of Halloween, the vibe of it, kind of autumn, the sort of the spookiness of it, the costumes, the kind of history of it, the witches, Samhain, and all of this stuff kind of. There's interesting stories that could be told, I think, around Halloween, and I think it would be a really fun idea to each year have a series of sequels to Trick or Treat where we get fun new stories.
Would you have a different director each year, or would you say like 4 directors?
I would say 4 directors. I would love to see, because I think the fun of an anthology horror film, we've had them ever since the 1940s. They've always been popular. There was a real wave of them in the 1960s and 70s by studios like Amicus and people like this. And the fun of them is that they're all so different in their vibe and in their tone. And that even if you get a bad one, you might get a fun one that comes, 15 minutes later. Like, I don't know, there's something about it that appeals to my kind of low attention span, maybe, as well, right? In that it always mixes it up. You're always going to get something different. Some are always going to be better than others, but you usually come out of watching an anthology film saying at least a chunk of those were really, really fun. So that movie was, at least usually a 3-star movie, because for the most part, they're always going to be fun to, a certain proportion of them at least. So I would give it to different filmmakers. Yeah.
This is quite fun, and it's also quite interesting how the stories all link to each other.
Yeah.
Like they all it's not just Sam that links them, they all kind of interlink with each other, don't they?
That's right.
The nice reveal at the end of Brian Cox being the guy from The Story and the other one. And
I called that
exactly.
first time I saw it.
Yeah, exactly. It's great, and they're all quite silly stories. Again, like I think they know what they are tonally. These films are not trying to be deadly serious in the way that, again, the Halloween films feel like they're quite earnest. Like
they're sort of the Halloween stories that. Sorry,
Yeah.
they're sort of the Halloween stories you tell each other when you're kids.
Yeah.
Aren't they? Like
Exactly.
this happened, like this kind of like that guy that lives there, he did this, like that kind of
Exactly that. And they're almost like, you could almost show Trick or Treat to kids. They almost have a kind of Goosebumps sensibility,
Yeah, it does.
right? Except
Yeah.
that they've also got a kind of quite nasty edge, some of them as well. They have real stings in their tails at the end of most of these films as well. So yeah, I kind of love that. I think it's a really fun idea.
Are you surprised it hasn't got a sequel already? Because I'm reading about it today, and they slightly announced it like twice that they're going to do a sequel, and nothing's ever happened from it.
Exactly. I think that's the other thing that made it spring to mind for me, is that like it feels like people have been wanting this sequel
Because it's a cult thing, isn't it?
It's a real cult favorite. It's a real favorite amongst horror fans. You know, it's become one of those slow burn word of mouth favorites where
Yeah.
it didn't really get seen by anyone when it first came out.
I'd
But
never heard of it, mate.
No,
No, I
exactly.
hadn't
But
either.
since then, it's kind of grown in its reputation. And yeah, there's always talks of sequels, and then they always fall through. I don't know why. It's really weird. But yeah, I think me and a lot of other horror fans out there would love to see a Trick or Treat sequel. Yeah.
I was listening to a podcast the other day, a trip to cinema with Alex Zane, and he had Dexter Fletcher on.
Yeah.
And he was talking about making things for video on demand and how attention span. You
Yes.
can't. He was talking about he wanted to put this long, like Italian job drive up a mountainside, and they're like, you can't do that because people have the opportunity to turn it off.
Yeah.
I think with something like this, it's a great, because if they don't want it, they could just try and skip to the next one. But
Yeah.
if not, like you said, they'll know in about 10 minutes it's going to be a new story anyway.
Totally. Yeah, I think there's something really lovely about that. You know, I think that's true. Our attention spans are getting worse and worse, in the modern world. It feels like I find it really difficult not to suddenly want to glance at my phone midway through a movie or whatever it might be. And I think because of that, I'm finding I'm enjoying more and more TV rather than film, like shorter content, and then particularly content like Inside Number 9 or Black Mirror, where you get these like little different stories to dip in and out of as well,
Well, creatively, it must be so freeing to make something like this, and so exciting.
Yeah, for sure. Exactly. So, yeah, I think bring back the kind of classic spooky, Treehouse of Horror-esque stories, but give them a bit of polish, give them a kind of Netflix or Apple TV kind of sheen, and go dark and adult with them too, in a way.
Would you? Because I think Sam's the most iconic thing from this. I've seen him. Now I know what it's from.
Yeah.
Would you have to bring him back, that character, and tie it around him, or would he just be like a teaser somewhere?
Yeah, I reckon you could very loosely tie it around him. Like maybe you get a glimpse of him here and there at the beginning and the end or something like that. I don't think it needs to be. I think the worst thing it can do is try and create this kind of like narrative where everything has to mean something or connect to something else. Because again, the fun of these films is that they're not that. Like again, going back to the kind of Marvel fatigue, I think I and probably a lot of people probably would welcome just give us some individual good stories. Don't worry too much about making it something bigger or making it something that connects, give me something that is just a series of fun set pieces or stories,
Didn't Del Toro do something last year?
He did. What was that called again? Yeah, that's it. Cabinet of Curiosities. Yeah, exactly. Which were fun. Some of them were great. Some of them less great. But it's
that was
a fun
different
idea
filmmakers as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was, and some really good ones that we had in there as well. And Jordan Peele brought back the Twilight Zone as well, which was really fun. Jordan Peele himself kind of introduced each episode like a kind of like that kind of old school host. And I think these ideas are really, really fun ideas.
Have you got any directors you would like to see do your part?
Oh, again, like going back to some of those filmmakers I was talking about earlier who are kind of really firing on all cylinders right now, like Ari Aster is an amazing visual director. He started as a short film director, and some of his shorts are absolutely incredible. So I feel like he would do a really good job. Just as we're recording this, I just watched last night Beau is Afraid, his new film.
Oh, what's it like?
It's bonkers. I mean,
Okay.
it's 3 hours long. Which it didn't need to be that long, but it has some incredible moments and also some really not great moments that I would have liked to have just cut. It's one of those sorts of movies. It feels a little bit like he's been let loose with complete creative freedom, and maybe he shouldn't have been. but yeah, he's great though, and I feel like given the confines of make a 15-minute horror story, I think he'd do an amazing job.
Yeah.
Same with Jennifer Kent, who directed The Babadook. I think she's amazing. Julia Ducournau, a French director who made films like Raw. And Titan. Oh my god, like powerful,
Raw.
disturbing stuff, right?
Raw sticks in my brain.
I know, like you never forget it. Did you watch her next film, Titan?
Not yet, no.
Not yet.
Unless someone picks it, Mike.
Jesus. It is hardcore. Like I am pretty good with gore and body horror, but there were moments when I had to look away and cover my eyes and wince. It is
I would rather
hardcore.
watch Evil Dead Rise again than watch Raw again.
Yeah. Exactly. So I think she's an amazing filmmaker. So yeah, people like that I would love to see. Come and give us 15 minutes that are really gonna mess with my head.
Those were Mike Muncer's Unequal Sequels. I know I'm saying this every week right now, but what a lovely chat that was.
What a lovely chat Mike is.
I was a bit worried about this one because I'm not a massive horror fan.
Yeah.
And I know like Mike's the evolution of horror guy.
He's the horror guy.
He's the horror guy. And I was a little bit like, oh, my horror knowledge is weak at best. But you know what? He was awesome. He was awesome. So, yeah, Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors as his best sequel. The first time I've ever seen a Nightmare on Elm Street before. And I think I came in at a high point, potentially.
I think you might have done. I mean, that is some, interesting filmmaking in that film. It's they get very creative deaths. And, yeah, I was like you, Rich, because I'm not massive on horror either. I've dabbled a bit more than you, but... It's not as horror-y and gory and bloody as I thought these Nightmare on Elm Street films are. I mean, as a child, I bet they're fucking frightening. But as men nearly our 40s, it was just fun.
Yeah. You know what wasn't fun, though?
Again.
Watching Jurassic World of Dominion again. It is definitely our most hated sequel now.
It gets a lot of mentions in the disappointing department and in the worst. Guys, just let know the makers of Jurassic World Dominion, you fucked up big time.
Big time. I think it's at least 3 people have picked it as worst sequel, if not more.
Definitely 3.
Definitely at least 3.
Petros last year, Boyd last year. I want to say last year, I mean last season. But a lot of people have mentioned it disappointing. Russell Bailey mentioned it a lot in disappointing. And now we've got it again today, Mike, picking it as the worst. It is a really bad film.
Guys. It's bad. And then for the Dream sequel, Trick or Treat, which again,
delightful.
I didn't know existed and actually really quite enjoyed. And I didn't think I would because it's all the things I kind of don't really like about movies, like some serious child endangerment. It's kind of a bit gruesome in places.
Some jump scares.
Actually, yeah, quite liked it. Had some fun.
Is that because Mike's so convincing and so good, at what he does?
I just think the guy knows the genre so well that he just picks a great choice. And doesn't matter if you're a fan of... And this is the thing, I shouldn't really say that I don't like horror, because you can't write off a whole genre like that.
No. We've learnt that now, right?
Yeah, we have, because I've seen some really good horrors. So, I think that's the point, isn't it? Is that he really knows his stuff. He really knows, he's picked a really good choice, and one that us as not being massive horror fans actually really liked. So
bravo him.
Yeah.
That's why he's so
Great
good at what he
shout.
does. Evolution of Horror podcast. If you haven't listened to it, go check it out. If you like horror films, it is like the go-to horror podcast.
Whilst you're out there checking that out and subscribing and get it in your pod player of choice every week, just do the same for us while you're there. If you've come along to this podcast because you're a big fan of Mike's, then just check out the other episodes we've got, because there's some really good ones on there. You'll find some more horror stuff if that's your bag.
It's there.
Yeah, it's there. You'll find it. Yeah, go out, go and subscribe. We'll drop into your pod player of choice at least once a week, if not more than that at the moment. And if you really, really like us, then get yourself over to anotherslice.com/unequal sequel, where you can subscribe to our special subscription service for only $2.99 a month. You'll get a sequel to all of our interview episodes. You'll get extra bonus content like our Flash review that we've done recently. You will also get access to Box Set Mentality and Disenfranchised, which is basically like having another couple of extra podcasts to listen to. It's very good value. But if that's not quite where you're at the moment, you've not quite got $2.99 a month, but you do want to help us out, get on the old social media, tell your friends. We are at Unequal Sequel on Twitter and on Instagram. You want to get in touch with us and tell us all about your opinions about the choices that Mike's made, then you can drop us an email, unequalsequel@hotmail.com. Yes, that is hotmail.com, because we are old men from the 90s. So, yeah, give us a shout, and we'll read out anything you say on the podcast.
Yeah, we're very much like Will Ferrell and Anchorman. We will read out literally anything.
Literally anything. Yeah.
Go fuck yourself, San Diego.
San Diego means a whale's vagina.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. If this is your first time listening because of Mike, welcome. Hello. Hope you enjoyed that. Hopefully you stick around and check out a few other episodes. We're very warm and welcoming, so feel free to go and do whatever you want. I've got nothing else to say. I've just realised. My mind's gone blank. So I'm just going to say bye, because I think that's the easiest thing I can do right now is bye. You know, he's also going to say bye.
Bye!
So that's done. He said bye, I've said bye, and now it's just a bye. Bye.
That was a lot of byes, dude.
I like saying bye. They can't see me waving. I don't know why I wave every week. It's ridiculous.
I don't know. It's the same when I do jazz hands every time I say extra on the extra episode.
I think it's for me and you.
No one can see it. Yeah, it's just for you, mate.
And a lot of people saying, are you going to do video podcasts? The answer is fuck no.
No. Have you seen how ugly we are? Christ.